As always, President Trump makes a lot of news every time he speaks, doesn't he? And he certainly did at today's inauguration speech. So we're here with CBS 8's political experts, Wendy and Fink, to break down today's historic inauguration and learn what all these executive orders, he's already telling us what he's going to do, and he's going to sign many of them today. So let's talk about this, ladies. First of all, I want to ask you, what stood out to you about today's inauguration?
Well, I thought it was unique in several different ways, and not just because it was moved in from the outside, although that certainly changed the dynamics. Socially, interpersonally, everybody was closer together. They certainly looked a lot more comfortable, I'll tell you that. But this was not his first rodeo. I mean, when was the last time? I know it was the 1800s, but in our lifetimes, you have a president returning to the White House. So this time, he won the popular vote, so it wasn't this sort of imposter syndrome a little bit that we saw the first time around, at least among his supporters. But on the other hand, he really went bold with some of the predictions he made. Yet we also know that we saw that from the first administration. They were tied up with legal challenges, and in the interim, it was almost like there were alternative methods on a bipartisan basis that some of that got done. So one wonders whether the bold statements today are going to be done by executive order, as I guess he's doing right now, or whether there's going to be some other way to accomplish some of those goals.
To me, it was about contradictions. He talked about some of the things he talked about on the campaign trail, so that wasn't a surprise. He pledged to lower costs, but then he talked about tariffs, which we know increase costs for consumers. He said he wanted to stop all wars and pledged to stop all wars, but then he was picking fights with Greenland and Panama. He said he wanted to be a unity president, but then started and leaned in heavily on his executive orders around things that a lot of people consider to be culture wars. So I think you see that there's always a tension between the desire to the sort of poetry of governance and the realities of governance, and that was on full display today in Trump's rhetoric and intentions.
And we normally don't hear the word poetry in the same sentence as Trump giving a speech, but you are correct. He was reading off a teleprompter, and he did have some of that ready to go, ready to say. He started out of the gate a little bit gloom and doom, definitely very direct, but then softened it towards the end to talk about what he started out with as the golden age of America.
But what did you think about it then? So he had his inauguration speech here, where we're looking in the Capitol Rotunda, where he had his swearing in. But then he went to the visitors area, where that was more of like maybe his favorite supporters, his biggest fans. They were in that part. And that was an even more fiery speech, really. That was kind of the Trump that we remember from the first 4 years.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, that was more of the classic Trump, I think. And Laura and I both remember the first inauguration. The classic Trump speech was right out of the gate. However, I also will say that there were some shades of the best speech I think he's ever given, which was at the Republican National Convention shortly after the first assassination attempt. Sadly, there was a first and a second. But there was a little bit of that during the speech today. But then you're right, when he went over to his supporters where he was more comfortable, one of the things he disclosed is how much he'd cut out of his speech at the urging of J.D. Vance, Melania Trump, and no doubt his advisors.
And then he went ahead and said it all.
Well, and also when you look at who was in the crowd, for the first time, we saw the richest men in America sitting front row, sitting ahead of the cabinet appointees, sitting ahead of the senators, sitting ahead of the Supreme Court justices.
Sitting with his family.
Sitting with his family. And that is a sign of who he is looking to work with and to govern with. Now, we have seen these are people who have donated to his inauguration. These are people who are crafting policy within his administration. I think it leaves the open question, though. I think between his words and his deeds today, you saw that he really spoke like he had a mandate. But here's a word of caution. I would say a third of Americans are diehard Trump supporters and believe and want him to succeed in every way. I would say probably 15 to 20% are hoping for the best. And I would say close to half are vehemently opposed to his policy prescriptions. This is not a mandate. No president in this modern era goes into governance with a mandate. And there is danger in losing those people as you face the midterms in 2 years and as your successor faces the ballot box in 4.
I think they feel like they do have a mandate with the popular vote, the way that they're talking on Capitol Hill. When he first made his cabinet picks, the names seemed controversial, but I mean, I'm hearing today people on the Hill are saying, no, they're all going to be confirmed. So he's got the House, he's got the Senate. How long do you think this honeymoon phase will last?
Well, I think it's up to him to make it a honeymoon phase. Obviously, his supporters are behind him, but they're behind him with some big expectations. And I say that because not everybody that thought they were going to vote for him back in 2016 thought they would be voting for him again. Yet look what's happened in America since then. And I just mean the very practical issues. You know, people are not happy with foreign wars, being drawn into that, the money that's being spent out of the country, the price at the pump in the grocery store. These are the things we've been talking about in the last 4 years. Everybody agreed that we need a change, but he's got to make it a honeymoon and not a hangover, as we say.
Well,
you know?
the way that hangover starts is if you see that narrow majority in Congress, the House specifically, he keeps appointing people and losing votes by appointing people into his cabinet.
Because they're the same good people.
So
yeah.
what he is going to have to deal with is also the deep divisions in the Republican Party, who do not agree necessarily on policy. And because they control all three chambers, we're going to see that come to the fore more than we usually would when there's a divided House. So the midterms, 2 short years away, that's what he's got to look out for. Because if he loses the House or the Senate or both, that makes governing a lot harder.
We might also see some Democrats decide to compromise with the Republicans on some issues that are important to their constituents, issues that shouldn't be controversial, like bringing down prices, like border security, community safety, healthcare. I mean, there are so many things, education. There are so many ways that these two parties can work together. And if we see that, that may have been part of the reason that, as you say, he was drawing from the same pool that would necessarily make it harder to get legislation passed.
All right, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. We always love to hear your perspective.